Hi guys, welcome to lesson 11, cube shape and shading. Before we get into a cube and what it is, its shape and its shading, let's go over the things we've learned. See if you can say these with me. We can see light and dark. When we draw, we show highlights and shadows. Don't be afraid to mark. Wrong marks help us find right marks. Highlights change into shadows, sometimes suddenly, sometimes slowly. Paper is flat, objects aren't. We draw exactly what we see from one angle. The direction of the light changes where the highlights, midtones, and shadows are. Now we can see the highlight is on the opposite side of this half sphere. And as we shift, I'll move it this way. As we shift the light, everything changes. And that's very important. Let's see. Bright white is rare in our world, so begin drawings with a toned ground. Different objects have shapes in common, right? So these are both have a circle on one end, but we can see they're very different objects. Watch for those similarities because it makes it easier to draw when you already know about how to draw a circle or an ellipse and build off of it from there. Everyday items can be combinations of simple shapes. A fir tree is a cylinder and a cone. Or an ice cream cone is half of a sphere and a cone. Cast shadows will help your drawing seem more real. So here we have examples of our cast shadows. And you can see that for each object, the cast shadow is a different shape because the object blocking the light is different. Now, making light marks can be just as important as dark marks. We learned that last week with our additive drawing material, where we add material to the page, and our subtractive material, where we subtract material from the page. This makes dark marks, this makes light marks, and they are equally important. All right, let's begin speaking about a cube. Does anybody know what a cube is? This is a cube. It reminds me of a building block. Those basic wooden ones with like letters and numbers. A cube is like a square, but it is three-dimensional. There's a square. There's a square. It's full, like every side, all 6 sides have squares. All edges are the same length, just like in a 2-dimensional square. The edges are the same. The same is true with this 3-dimensional square. So from this angle, it appears very flat. However, if we turn it just a little bit, it no longer appears flat. We can see many of the corners and different lines going backwards away from our eyesight from where we're looking at it. Visually, it becomes this object with 3 dimensions. So we're not really going to draw it from this angle because that's just a square. We are going to draw it from a different angle. Let me grab our paper for today. So this is the handout that you need. And we need to notice that when we look at, this is the cube, this is the same cube. I took a picture of it and I put it on your handout so that it won't move and you won't move. And you can look at it from this one angle as we try to draw it. You can see that on the top of our image and our actual square, this is what we call a foreshortened square. The back side, the back corner of it is far away, and it makes it almost appear like it's been squashed. We worked with that in Cylinder as well. When we turned it away, it became an ellipse, a really flattened circle. Same is true with the cube. When we have it here and then we turn it away gradually, we get this almost like a diamond shape. And it's been flattened. Okay, so this is called a foreshortened square. And we are going to draw that part first. What else do you guys notice about this? I notice that all the lines, many of the lines, are what we call parallel lines. These two edges of the cube, if they never touch, they go along the same plane this way. They're the same distance apart continuously, and they would never touch if they continued on. That is parallel lines. I see it again here, parallel lines. If I turn it this way, now I almost see three parallel lines. This one, this one, this one. You guys say parallel. Good. Parallel lines never touch. Intersecting lines do touch. Intersecting lines are straight lines that end up touching each other at a single point. On our cube today, there are many intersecting lines that create our corners, also known as vertices. And it's important to observe how they relate to each other, right? Because, this one's traveling this way, this one's traveling this way, and boom, that's where they meet and they make a corner. These are the things that are important to observe before you draw. So that's why we're talking about them now. If we can transition over to this, our drawing, our photograph, I should say. Those are those two intersecting lines here, with the third one coming up from the bottom, that make a corner. And then what's interesting is the parallel lines in our image. These are the parallel lines that we see. 1, 2, and 3. And those are the observations that will be most important for us as we draw our cube today. Now, before we begin, what do? Remember? Tone the ground. Okay, so I'm going to tone my ground. You guys can do the same. So use your additive charcoal to tone your ground, and then your chamois to soften it. Remember, pause the video if you need time beyond what I do. Okay, the next thing we are going to do to achieve this outline, the shape of a cube, we need to draw 2 points in the center of our page that are pretty close together. The points we're going to draw are this one and this one. It's going to represent our corners, but we're going to start just with the points. See? Okay, so they're pretty close together. My page, there's a lot of space kind of underneath because that's where we'll draw the bottom part of the cube. So I have my points. Now, we're also going to then draw kind of from the center of those 2 points, we're going to draw 2 external points about the same distance away, and those are going to represent these corners. Okay, so you should have, like me, these 4 points. I'm going to make mine pretty dark so y'all can see them well. Yours don't need to be dark, only where you can see them. Now, we're going to connect all the edges of this to create a diamond shape. Try to keep a straight line because the cube has only straight edges, right? There's nothing curved about this. So today we're working on straight lines. I like to make a few strokes to try and get the angle of my line right. There. There's the top of my cube. Now, moving on to the next lines. We are going to draw 2 straight lines down from the very edge points, okay? We're going to end up drawing these 2 lines. Notice these 2 lines do not go as low as this front one will. It's good to keep that in mind. So these appear shorter, They're not shorter, they're the same length, but they are farther back, and they also start higher. Can you guys see that they start higher than this point? Those lines start higher and then they end sooner, okay? So again, straight lines, and you can just estimate about what might look like a cube. It might be a little longer. All right. And then for the front line, we're going to do the same thing, simple, and we're going to make it a little bit longer. So I'm going to imagine maybe about where it should come, maybe here. Let's try it. Straight line down. Strokey lines will help me kind of make it seem straighter. You figure out what works for you. Okay, I'm happy with that. It might be just a little tall for a cube, so maybe I'm gonna shorten my lines just a scotch. I just used the tip of my finger to remove those lines. Let's see, okay. Now we're going to connect the bottom corners, and it will create these bottom edges of our cube. And it's a straight line. There we go. Cube shape. That is the cube shape we're working with. If I can draw your attention to this outline, I would like you to notice the dotted lines at the back. Those are the invisible edges inside, well, at the back of our cube, the things that we can't see. So this is the like up and down dotty line at the very back. Imagine it with me. My fingers are touching it. As it turns away, it's back there. And then also the same is true of the bottom edges, the bottom back edges. They're back there. And so when we use our dotty lines like this, we're not going to draw this today, but I wanted you guys to have the knowledge that those lines are at the back of your cube, and that is the direction that they would go. The bottom part becomes another foreshortened square, and then the back edge is another parallel line that's pretty much traveling along the same path as this one, just further back in our depth dimension. It's farther away. Okay? Great. Now, let's talk about the cube shading. Where is our light source in this? It is coming from the back side of the cube, glancing across this way and casting the shadow this way. So it's like coming way from back here somewhere. Okay, so that we're gonna mimic in this. Okay, what's the brightest part of the cube? It's this top, the flat section on top. How about the mid-tone? There's one area that's a mid-tone, and it's gonna be this side that is sort of near the light source. Then the darkest part of the cube is the back of the cube, away, the one that's away from the light source, because light only shines on one direction, and then the shadows come on the opposite. Then this guy on the bottom, does anybody remember what he's called? He's a cast shadow. We are going to draw a cast shadow today as well. Then this is the darkest part of what we have today in our drawing. Now, before we can begin shading, I realize we need to draw the shape for our cast shadow too. So I'm going to tone a little more of my ground here. I imagine you have enough space on yours, but I want to make sure I can include my cast shadow. And that should be sufficient. Now, observing my cast shadow, I can see that this bottom edge, it's almost like a continuous line as it comes out this way. And this one is a continuous line of the back edge, this dotted line here. And so they just kind of come out, and they're pretty much parallel to one another, not exactly, but almost parallel lines. And then they have this guy who the angle of this, let's see, pretty much matches the angle of this and this. Do you guys, can you see that? Okay, so those are important observations when we're working with harsh edges, to slow down and figure out how they relate to one another before you draw them. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and start drawing a cast shadow here. Those two edges coming away from the cube. Another observation I'm going to make is I see this corner is at a very different location than this corner, right? So I wanna try to achieve a similar effect. I'm gonna use some lines to make sure that my bottom corner of my shadow is much more centered and this guy is way farther out to the left. There we go. All right. I'm happy with that. Another detail I noticed was that the shadow, on your page you can probably see closer, the shadow actually extends under our cube. Can you see the shadow kind of underneath? And that will really help it feel real if we include that. Okay, now that we have the shape of our cast shadow, we are going to darken it. I like to use my charcoal on its side to fill in quickly. So fill it in, get it dark. Remember, do this with me. Okay, it's filled in. I will come in with my tortillon and really try and scrub it into the page so that it stays dark. I'm also using my tortillon to soften edges to help it appear more real. Okay, I'm happy with my cast shadow. And when you guys are ready to move on, unpause the video. Now we're going to darken the darkest edge of the cube. I should say face. These are called faces. Flat edges of geometric shapes are faces. So this face of the cube, the dark side, we're going to darken, keeping in mind it's a little bit lighter than the shadow. Not a lot lighter, but it is lighter. Observe carefully and it will help you draw well. Something about that piece of charcoal is driving me crazy, so I'm just gonna get a different one. Okay. I think I'm happy with that amount of charcoal, so again, gonna grab my tortillon and blend it, pressing it into the page. Oh yeah, I love that the value of this. Remember, the value talks about how light or how dark it is. So the value of this feels just right to me. It is lighter than the shadow, but it is than the cast shadow, I should say, but it is still quite dark. Okay, mid-tone. When you're done with the shadow, you can unpause and we'll do the mid-tone. For the mid-tone, I'm going to press more lightly. Again, just get it filled in though. And until you blend it with the tortillon, it can be hard to tell if you've gotten the right value or not. What do you guys think of my value? Seems a little too dark. I'm going to blend it with my finger, and my finger is going to pick up excess material and make it a little bit lighter. That's better. Before I move on, I'm actually going to darken the edge between them and maybe just add a tiny bit more material to that shadow side, because when I'm looking here to here, it's a pretty big difference. But on my page, here to here, it is not big enough of a difference. So I'm gonna darken this, and it will really make that corner, that long edge pop. And I might even just bring in more. It just needs to be darker. It's funny, I thought it was just perfect, didn't I, until I added more. So just keep observing and adjust, tweak your drawing until it feels right. Okay, I'm gonna leave it like that. I'm happy with that now. Boom, 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 back and forth looking at it. I think that's pretty good. We'll see how I feel about it when I put in the highlight on top, which, by the way, the highlight, here's an interesting point for us. On here, it looks quite dark for a highlight because it's on a bright white background. On here, you need to decide, do you want your highlight to be brighter or darker than your toned ground? It should, I think, for the eye, for looking at your drawing, it's more interesting if it does not match. So, I think I want my highlight to actually be lighter than my toned ground. So I can do a few things. Darken my toned ground, which would take a few minutes to adjust that without messing up my cube. Okay, that's better. Good, because now it's kind of matching, which is, again, not what I want. But I will come in with my subtractive material and remove some of that top material, especially on the edges. And I can still see my dots, so I'll probably try and work those away, the little dots that helped me mark out my shape. Near the corner, it's going to get really skinny, so I'm making sure to make the tip of my eraser thin so I can really get into the corner there. Try not to rush. Just do it right. Nice and slow. And there we have a cube. Okay, we've learned the shape. We've done one example of shading. And now if you want to go through, soften any edges that are harsh, soften away your little dots using various materials, and just refine it until you're happy with it. Before I let you guys go, I wanted to challenge you to go home and find cubes around your house. And they can be things that are almost cubes, right? This is almost a cube. It's just really long in one direction. Drawing principles are nearly the same for this shape and this shape. And so I'm thinking of a tissue box. A tissue box is almost a cube. It's not, but it has the same drawing principles. And so put your lookers on at home and find some things that are related or are cubes. Also, don't forget to practice looking, and it's going to help you draw well. Today we learned how to observe straight lines and how they're related to each other. That helps us draw cubes, and other objects with so many straight lines and corners and flat faces.